I will describe in detail the 17th verse of Chapter 1, Prathopadesh Rasamarana of Rasaratnakara Rasayankhand. Now the Roman transliteration of this incredibly pivotal verse reads like this: Retro Jagarana Diva Swapna Maithunam Kalaha Udvegam Chintam Shokam Cha Varjiyate. When we actually break down the Anway, which is basically the syntactic sequence of this verse, it systematically strings together these very specific human behaviors and emotional states, and it culminates in this powerful verb, varjiyate, and that translates strictly to must entirely abandon. Semantically speaking, guys, this isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's an absolute therapeutic contraindication. What this means is that before we even think about processing the metals, the text is demanding the processing of the human practitioner first. Chapter 1 of the Prathopadesh meticulously lists these major alchemical substances, specifically parada, which is mercury, gandhaka, or sulfur, along with abraka, which is mica, and various tatus, meaning those foundational metals. The text dictates that preparing these substances requires an immense transfer of energy. The foundational purpose outlined right here in this chapter is that the human body literally acts as the ultimate crucible. If the practitioner's biological and psychological states are volatile, the intricate chemical processing of these heavy metals and powerful herbal amalgams will fundamentally fail. The ancient compilers understood something profound: the laboratory is just an extension of the alchemist's own physiology. Therefore, the processing of these intense, raw earth elements demands that the internal environment of the person ingesting or working with them is maintained in a state of flawless, undisturbed equilibrium.
Notice the absolute lack of compromise here in the English translation. Night vigil, day sleep, intercourse, discord, anxiety, worry, and grief must be entirely abandoned during Rasayana. The text establishes a rigid, non-negotiable baseline. You simply cannot partake in this advanced chemical therapy if your daily behaviors and mental states are chaotic. And what's really amazing is how this ancient mandate aligns perfectly with modern scientific perspectives, specifically in the fields of chronobiology and neurobiology. Chronobiology is the study of our circadian rhythms, the physical, mental, and behavioral changes that follow a 24-hour cycle. So, when the verse strictly prohibits night vigil and day sleep, it's actually demanding the strict preservation of the circadian rhythm. Modern neurobiology backs this up entirely, confirming that disrupting this cycle significantly alters cellular repair, hormone synthesis, and metabolic function. The ancient alchemists essentially observed that without a completely stabilized circadian rhythm, the human body cannot safely metabolize potent pharmacological compounds. There is absolutely no middle ground offered in the text because, biologically speaking, if you introduce powerful medicinal combinations into a biologically dysregulated system, you are essentially transforming a cure into a toxin. This prohibition isn't some sort of ancient moral judgment, it is a profound, hard biological prerequisite.
To really understand why these rules were so incredibly strict, we have to trace the knowledge back to its source. The Rasayankhand is a foundational manual of Indian alchemy, and it beautifully blends profound philosophical intent with rigorous empirical chemistry. This text provides a detailed, descriptive introduction to highly specialized instruments known as yantras. It gets into the specifics of the musha, or the crucibles designed to withstand extreme, intense heat, and the koshti, which are the alchemical furnaces used for smelting and extracting pure essences. But beyond the literal metallurgy, the historical and philosophical purpose of these instruments carries this deep, rich symbolism. You see, the purification of mercury and metals in the furnace directly mirrors the purification of the human microcosm. In tantric and alchemical philosophy, the substances themselves hold immense symbolic weight. For instance, mercury is often viewed as the essence of Shiva, representing pure consciousness, while sulfur represents Shakti, the active cosmic energy. The combination of these substances in the laboratory was literally a physical manifestation of unifying cosmic forces. Therefore, the human biological system that was receiving these substances had to be absolutely pristine, properly calibrated, and philosophically aligned to handle such immense concentrated energy without facing a total systemic collapse.
Let's anchor our analysis directly in the primary document. Verse 17 of the Prathopadesh reveals its exact systematic structure, and it is brilliant. Let's look closely at the paragraph and its deep literal meaning. The original Sanskrit text states, Ratro Jagaranam, Diva Swapnam, Maithunam Kalaham, Udvega Chinta Shokam Cha Virjayet. Now, in terms of the Anvai, the logical connection of the words, the objects of prohibition are listed right up front, followed directly by the imperative verb. The simple English meaning is very clear. One must completely forsake staying awake at night, sleeping during the day, sexual intercourse, quarreling, excitement or anxiety, constant worrying, and sorrow. But the detailed explanation goes so much deeper than just a list of don'ts. The ancient compilers methodically recorded a strict protocol to eliminate all variables that could possibly cause physiological inflammation or nervous system exhaustion. By identifying both behavioral chronodisruptions and severe emotional fluctuations in the exact same breath, these compilers documented a precise, holistic approach to human behavior that predates modern psychosomatic medicine by centuries. They totally understood that the vehicle, meaning the human body, had to be completely quieted and stabilized for the medicine to actually take its intended route.
Okay, let's walk through this linguistic breakdown, mapping the original Sanskrit directly to these behavioral prohibitions. Doing a comparative text analysis here is absolutely crucial to fully grasp its significance across ancient Indian medicine. The terms Ratru Jagaranam, which means night vigil, and Diva Swapnam, meaning day sleep, refer to severe biological clock disruptions. Maitunam is sexual intercourse, while the emotional states include kalaha or discord, udvega, which is anxiety, chinta for worry, and shokam, meaning grief. Now, if we cross-reference this with the Traka Samhita, specifically Chikitsa Sthana Chapter 1, Pada 4, which deals with Kuti Pravashika Rasayana, a really intensive indoor rejuvenation therapy, we see the exact same behavioral constraints placed on the patient to conserve vital energy. Similarly, over in the Sushruta Samhita, Chikitsa Sthana Chapter 27, the preparation for absorbing potent medicinal therapies requires the absolute cessation of these exact physical and mental stressors. Furthermore, the Ashtanga Hridaya in Sutrasthana Chapter 7 details this fascinating concept of Navavegana Dharana. While it advises not to suppress natural physical urges, it explicitly commands the suppression and absolute control of detrimental mental urges like grief, worry, and anger. Across all these monumental foundational tests, these specific biological and neurological disruptions are universally identified as the primary antagonists to the assimilation of deep chemical healing.
So the verse logically categorizes these instructions into two very distinct buckets: physical prohibitions and mental prohibitions. And what's crucial here is that the text treats both categories with equal severity, highlighting the direct chemical and biological effects they have on the body. For instance, the prohibition on intercourse stems from the historical belief in the chemical and biological effects of over-sexualization and the resulting loss of vitality, which is known as shukradhatu. Depleting this vital essence was thought to severely compromise the immune system and totally wreck the body's ability to withstand the intense purification of the alchemical process. And if these strict rules were broken, well, the text didn't just abandon the patient, they prescribed very specific methods of atonement and mental purification. These methods, known as prayashita and sattva vijaya, involved rigorous dietary fasting, the chanting of specific restorative mantras to calm the nervous system down, and deep meditative practices designed to reset the psychological state. The practitioner had to physically and mentally atone to re-establish the baseline vitality required before the medicinal therapies could safely resume. You simply could not have physical fasting without concurrent emotional fasting. It's the whole shebang.
The sheer strictness of this really all comes down to maintaining an absolute alchemical equilibrium. The historical rationale is that processing these incredibly potent substances within the body required one's biological energy to be perfectly undisturbed. And today we can actually analyze this through the lens of modern endocrinology and cortisol overload, which is fascinating. The text is essentially warning about the neuroendocrine effect of discord, excitement, anxiety, and grief. When a person experiences kalaha, or discord, or udvega, anxiety, modern scientific evidence shows a massive activation of the HPA axis, which leads directly to cortisol overload. High cortisol fundamentally shifts the body from an anabolic, building up state, right into a catabolic, breaking down state. It impairs digestion, suppresses the immune system, and alters liver metabolism. A quick search of Google Scholar keywords like psychological stress and pharmacokinetics, or review articles on PubMed regarding Ayurveda, Rasayana, and endocrine modulation reveals that high-stress hormones actively prevent the proper absorption and metabolization of exogenous compounds. The ancient practitioners empirically observed what modern endocrinology now proves for sure: intricate chemical medicines will fail or even become toxic if the body's internal environment is flooded with stress hormones.
Now, examining physical depletion versus the alchemical process brings us to the crucial formulas related to the manufacturing method and specific dietary constraints to maintain physical vitality without straining the digestive system. The texts specifically prescribed diets like mungyush, which is a very light, nutrient-dense green gram soup, and odon, which is properly cooked rice. These exact dietary formulas were mandated because they are lagu,
or light to digest, providing essential caloric energy to sustain the body without diverting immense amounts of metabolic energy toward complex digestion. The rejuvenation therapy required this immense amount of baseline vitality to safely metabolize the specific amounts of the substances concerned. If a practitioner was out there exhausting their physical reserves through night vigils or sexual exertion, their digestive fire, known as Agni, would be completely compromised. The historical belief was that without the precise dietary support of Mung Yush and Odan, and with physical reserves depleted, the body would totally lack the foundational strength to properly assimilate the purified heavy metals and dense botanical compounds, rendering the entire alchemical process downright dangerous.
An emotional strain is positioned as equally destructive to biological balance. The text views emotional discord and grief as catastrophic to the delicate internal equilibrium. To really validate this ancient wisdom, we must look at modern neurobiology and glymphatic clearance. The glymphatic system is essentially the brain's macroscopic waste clearance system. Think of it as the brain's nightly power wash, and it is heavily dependent on deep, uninterrupted sleep. Night vigils completely impair glymphatic clearance, preventing the brain from washing away neurotoxic waste products like amyloid betas. Furthermore, emotional strain, constant worry, and grief keep the nervous system locked in a state of hyperarousal, which further disrupts restorative sleep architecture. While the historical text simply noted that a worried or grieving mind created a toxic internal environment, modern neurobiology explicitly demonstrates how a lack of sleep and chronic emotional distress literally allows cellular toxins to accumulate in the brain and central nervous system. The ancient alchemists brilliantly understood that profound psychological anxiety disrupts systemic circulation and cellular detoxification, directly blocking the assimilation of rejuvenating medicines.
This brings us to a working definition of holistic rejuvenation, the total integration and simultaneous purification of mind and body required to safely assimilate alchemical medicine. So what were the target diseases here? These intensive Rasayana therapies were historically targeted against Vata Vyadi, which are severe neurological and degenerative disorders, chronic wasting diseases like Rajaakshma, and premature aging, known as Jara. The amount of the medicine to be taken was actually minuscule but incredibly potent, often measured in rati or gunja. To put that into perspective, we are typically talking about just 125 to 250 milligrams, a tiny speck, administered with highly specific liquid vehicles or anupana. We see exactly this integration detailed across multiple historical texts. For example, in the Ayurveda Prakash, specifically Chapter 1 known as the Pada Prakaren, and in the Rasarnava, the absolute necessity of mental calm is reiterated heavily before administering even a single rati of processed mercury. The Rasaratna Samuchaya by Vedmata in Chapter 8, verses 16 and 17, completely echoes the sentiment, demanding the practitioner undergo precise mental purification before even handling or consuming these tiny, hyper-concentrated dosages of alchemical medicine. To truly put the potency of these medicines into perspective, consider the rigorous alchemical instructions for processing the substances concerned. This involves a highly detailed process, strict rituals, and a profound tantric philosophical purpose. The presence of the substances concerned, like parada, mercury, and gandhaka, sulfur, required a massive multi-stage purification process and combination known as ashta samskaras, or the 8 stages of purification, which included intense triturating, steaming, and sublimating. The historical belief was that these substances were dangerously toxic in their raw natural form. The result produced by this exhaustive chemical process was a bhasma, an oxidized nanoparticle-sized ash that was believed to be biologically highly bioavailable and entirely safe. However, the sutras related to the method of preparation explicitly state that these complex combinations could entirely fail or turn toxic right inside the human digestive tract if the mind of the patient was agitated. The rituals surrounding the preparation were absolutely not just superstition. They were methodical, focused practices ensuring the alchemist's absolute mental presence and the patient's absolute physical readiness.
Before we wrap up, let's synthesize these findings based on our analysis today. The key points are incredibly clear. Ancient alchemy demanded absolute behavioral and emotional regulation as a strict prerequisite for chemical medicine. What is truly worth learning here is the profound, nuanced understanding ancient scholars had of the mind-body connection. The points that have immense historical significance revolve around how texts like the Rasaratnakara systematically documented these multi-stage medicinal preparations right alongside strict lifestyle mandates. What has profound modern significance is how these classical claims and historical beliefs regarding circadian disruption and emotional stress are now completely validated by modern scientific evidence in chronobiology, neuroendocrine function, and glymphatic clearance. While some specific mystical properties of alchemical metals remain unproven claims, the biological constraints placed on the patient are scientifically flawless.
Topics that should absolutely be further researched include deeper clinical studies correlating specific Ayurvedic diets, like Mung Yush, with exact neuroendocrine stress responses during pharmacological treatments. And so it leaves us with a provocative thought to reflect on. Can true chemical healing occur without emotional peace? This ancient text suggests that profound emotional tranquility is not just a nice-to-have, it's a strict, non-negotiable prerequisite for physical recovery.
On behalf of the Vedmata AI family, it is our humble request that if you found our presentation informative, please share our video as widely as possible so that the authentic knowledge of Indian Vedic texts can reach the masses. Let us all participate in this yagya of knowledge. Har Har Mahadev.